Hello and welcome to Landy's Crypto Corner. Today is April 14th, 2025, and we're looking at Bitcoin as usual. Here on the daily, we will follow up with where things kind of ended up with the weekly close and some possible setups that might be in play from here. But first, we got to talk about the daily, kind of where things are right now. Bitcoin is trading a little bit above where we last spoke on Friday. It is now just below $85,000. And I've mentioned, countless times how important $85,000 is as a daily pivot and lower term time frame pivot. That is the post-expansion bear candle low. And that was the first bearish candle that helped kind of define the range. In fact, the close open here of that candle defined the 88,700 overhead resistance that Bitcoin's been knocking up against since losing the range up here. And of course, that is one of our major fib levels that we'll take a look at in a moment. But let's zoom in here on the daily, and we can see that we did get a nice close above the 84,720, and we even got a close above 85,166. But much like I said, the real resistance over here is, just around the $88,800 to $89,000 level. That's this low over here. That is the last weekly higher low, swing low. And, kind of below there, Bitcoin's consolidating, right? And does have a chance to continue to run the most recent low and possibly lower into the overhead, the downside area, which was overhead resistance last year, anywhere from that big zone at 65 to that 73,835. We did see a nice front run of that area, and even a nice test of the most recent low at 74,420.69. Nice. But we got to give it a chance to see if it's going to form, on any kind of a retrace, either a swing higher low locally or come back down further and try to create some higher low structure or equal low structure and possibly take out this area here. We could go from swing high to swing low and try to move up and test that 89, but we really don't know. As it stands right now, I think that it is prudent to be on the defensive when it comes to bullishness here until we see some concrete reclaims of the highs or the breaks of the highs here and reclaim of this swing low over here. And, we'll define some criteria in a moment. But one thing I want to note is we did get a little bit of a compression to a downside expansion, now bounce up to the upper first. In a setup like this, if a high is put in around this $83,000, maybe you want to see it drop that 82,765 here below the basis band essentially. It's fair game from a volatility standpoint to run back to the lows. And essentially, we need to see this low here at $78,000 to the close open here kind of hold up right around $79,500 to $80,000 just by that lower first standard deviation, which is, to be fair, a little bit above there at 80,000, almost 200. So, what I'd like to see is, and I mentioned this on Friday, is $89,000 essentially above these highs, reclaimed on a daily close, get some continuation up, give price a little bit more breathing room. If it does stop and pivot here, below $85,000, the lows are in play, and the volatility setup is that of a bearish one as it stands right now. Kind of rejecting that upper first standard deviation. And what we're going to do here is we're going to throw on some, and I don't usually talk about the moving averages, but you can get this on the indicator, which is free. This is the Landy Bands with Trend Checker. You can find it in the bit.ly link in my profile description on X, and also in the description of the video on YouTube. So let's go ahead and take a look at kind of where things are. This just so happens to be the 55, and we see Bitcoin trading around the 50 simple moving average. So the 55 EMA, the 200 EMA, and the 50 moving average here kind of right in the pocket here, finding this as resistance. Now, we can even see the 200 is now starting to creep its way up towards the high side structure right around the close open here at 87.5, which would look good on a reclaim to at least run 89, maybe even 90 and above, and up to 92 that we'll see here in a moment. But, it is still a bearish setup until proven otherwise, right? And I'd want to see constructive price action, higher low, equal low price action develop from here to give it a shot to actually legitimately leg up to the zone here. There is, the 92.8 and the $95,000 area that I've talked about so much. This candle here is the retest of the breakdown that led to new lower lows. So, that is the one to beat essentially. I'm bearish below 95 on the daily. Now, that doesn't mean bearish as in go into a bear market. This has been a pretty extended bearish period for price action. We have to see kind of how traditional markets react. They got some mean reversion today. Again, some higher low structure being built there. We'll see how that holds up throughout the course of this week into next week. But Bitcoin's kind of doing its own thing. It's been the early mover before traditional markets. So if it does move down, maybe we're looking at another move down in traditional markets to retest the lows or something. But if it moves up, maybe we see that happen in traditional markets as well. We just have to wait and see. But we are around some major moving averages. We got a 9/21 kind of cross coming in. Price action's getting squeezed, as denoted by the Bollinger Band setup here. So we had that expansion down to new lows, but the nice bounce up. And now we can see Bollinger Bands are contracting again. And volatility remains elevated, but not, it's not screaming hot there. This does read like a consolidation. Could it easily turn into a continuation? Yes, but we have to give it a chance to see kind of how things play out for the rest of this week. We're going to throw on support and resistance in just a moment, but let's go ahead and turn on the rest of our indicators here. We've got RSI. We have a bullish divergence here that is playing out. And, could it play out further? Sure. We're bouncing around the midline of RSI here, but it's still well within a bearish structure, a larger bearish structure. But, just to kind of get a gauge, bullish control zone or edge of the bullish control zones up here at that 91,750 or so. The simple moving average here is at 80,600. So that's the white moving average here. And then we have and I believe this is a 12 period that it's set to right now. I think that's default settings for this as well. Bearish control zones right around the actual low. So the edge of the bearish control zone right here would be a retest of the low. It's coming in around 74.5, which has been thoroughly tested. I think if price gets back down there, it probably goes at minimum for a swing down to the range highs from last year's consolidation. But, we're kind of getting an indecisive look as of right now. Momentum is pivoted at $80,000. So we're getting a little bit of a different read over here. 70, it's right around 80 if you average the two that I have on there. So again, same look. I mentioned this over the weekend for the 12-hour as kind of the leading indicator as we head into the daily that we need to watch it pretty carefully. Let's go ahead and take a look at support and resistance, areas of interest. $85,000. I am, kind of bearish, especially now with the upper first coming in line right around that $85,000 region. Locally more biased to come down and at least plumb the lows, or at least get some downside moves. But above $85,000, even in the lower term timeframes, I'd expect to run Sunday's high at this point at 86, and then maybe even try to break up towards the highs around the $88.5 to $89,000 here. That would look pretty good. It would at least give price some room. But again, we have 92 just above there. This is also the 1.168 88,700. This just so happens to be right where this higher low came in, and we had this fib on here for quite some time. What is this fib from? This fib is a fib extension from the bull of last cycle to the bear of 22, so 69 to $15,500. The 16.8% comes in right at 88,700. We've had this on our charts forever. We have the 1272 up here. which we have not seen a close above on longer term time frames at that 103,645. So, this is, we're trapped between like pretty strong overhead resistance right now, and we haven't yet to see the big ass weekly zone of interest down here tested. Of course, remember the $65,000 is the monthly basis band, or 20 simple, to the actual 73,835. You can call it $74,000. Now $65,000 is also a weekly high. 65,600, that was the higher high in the weekly that led to the higher lows that brought price up here in the first place. So, this was right here. We had the nice little dip down and then reclaim. We got a little rejection front run of the all-time high, held the zone, and then boom, up on expansion. So, it's still in the cards that the lows could be tested. Now, below the lower second, basically $78,000, we are looking for expansion to go retest the lows. Somewhere around the lower third standard deviation, around that $74,500 to $75,000. Anywhere below there would be expansion into the big ass weekly zone of interest right there. There are some daily areas in there, $71,500 to $72,000 being a key one, $70,000 as well. I think $70,000 was was this high right here, if I remember correctly. Yep, $70,000 on the dot. We had the $72,000 swings here, the double top. There's definitely some areas of interest to be aware of on the daily down there, but I wouldn't. Wicks can kind of land anywhere, right? And even if we saw 92 taken out, we need to see a recovery of the weekly higher low close open, and that's at 93.5 before even getting to these two twin tower test candles that we're testing the bottom side of this consolidation before moving on to lower lows, right? Well, we had the first big lower low, and then a retest over the weekend. That was a Sunday. Yeah, it was Sunday into Monday. Just paint it right back down. Held 85 as a support before breaking down to new lower lows, rejection of the range lows, and then boom down. A little bit of a front run of the last year's highs. So, not too much to make of this right now. I would be cautious if we don't get continuation. We're going to see the pivot start to move up, especially if this puts in a high. On the daily, it's pretty easy. Where this put in a high, again, you can take one of these two lows. You could take 83, or you could take the upper 82 at 82,765 on a close. Understand that below 82,765 would put it below the basis band, and the bearish half of the band's more likely to go run those lows. We need to see essentially 78 to 80. The lower second standard deviation is kind of the zone of interest down there. And I know that we do have lows down there, but if we start getting closes, if we haven't tested the 76.5, we're probably likely to do so, and probably going to be testing 75 to the actual lows, maybe even lower. So keep that in the back of your mind as we kind of move up the time frames here. Actually, we're going to go down the time frame. We're going to go down the time frames first to the 12-hour. And we'll see that the 12-hour did put in a high over here and is just consolidating sideways by the upper first standard deviation. And we have the confirmed high. We do have a Stoke turn. It's a regular Stoke, not a Stoke RSI, so this is not measuring the velocity of RSI. We can just look at RSI for that. This is measuring close over close price momentum. 85,350 is the pivot to turn it back up. And, being in the bullish half of the bands here is a good thing above 81. And that, the warning is on the 12 hours going to come below this $79.5, $80,000 close open down here, and then of course the swing low and the just above $78,000. So it essentially would be testing the big wick low area of the first move down around that 78,167. Depends on the chart that you're looking at, though. This is spot, Coinbase spot. So, can this get a bullish reset? Yes. Is this, a higher low swing? Yes. Has not closed it to make it a higher low close, but it is a higher low swing at 83. Below there, we're testing lower. Above there, we're testing higher. We're probably going to test, around $88.5 to $89,000 up here, and see if we can't get a daily recovery up there, start pushing it towards 90, 92 or so. Let's go ahead and take a look at that weekly. All right, weekly, same criteria that we talked about on Friday. All right, excuse the kids. 88,800, essentially $89,000. Not only would that set the low, because so far we just have a swing low set. We need to see a closing low. Some are going to call it $86,000. Some are going to be looking a little bit further up, depending on the chart. $86,000 would set the low because that would put it back above last week's high. That's also the close open right here of the lower high. But again, means nothing trading below essentially $89,000, this last lower high on a swing basis confirmed. But that's going to be our criteria. Close above 89 basically, and we would see a trend break plus a low set, and that would look good to at least test further up from a weekly standpoint, at least to 93.5, maybe in the basis band slightly below there at 92.5. Anywhere above there, we're looking probably back to 100,000 by the upper first standard deviation. You could take the close open on the weekly up here at like 102,565, but we'll talk well before I think that is going to occur if it does make an upside move. But more importantly is the fact that if it sets a low, it's going to be on hidden bullish divergence again from this last low over here from September of last year. This was a higher low swing, lower low close, right? And this was where we were looking for a transition in price at this point. And you might remember if you were watching my stuff back then that we needed to see a close above $65,000. That just so happens to be the prior cycle first high from 2021, the first real major all-time high before that big dump off to basically 28 to 30. And then we saw the close above there come in at that, we saw the high rather 66,550, and then the close open right there at 65,600. That's noted as part of the big ass weekly zone of interest between this high and the all-time high for that particular range back then at 73,835, 74K. Then we saw the swing higher low, set the higher low, and then boom up. Well, this is where we would see on a low set above around $89,000, we would see another drive, a continuation drive or hidden bullish divergence drive that I think at least on first leg would get it back in the range up here and, possibly get continuation, but we would want to see healthy structure built because it would be a trend break, but we want to see higher low, equal low structure off of any higher high trend break, right? And in this case, the weekly is showing the possibility on closes above 79,631. I'd say just call it $80,000 that we would get a momentum shift week over week. We have an initial cross. Can we get that continuation? Maybe. Look at DMIs right at 93.5 or so, right by that weekly higher low. Might not be important to many of you in my audience. I don't really talk about DMI and ADX and all that, but if you'd ever like me to get into it, I can. But that would look pretty good. At least to, week over week, close above around $80,000, momentum shift, as long as it holds the low. Probably looking for things to test out further, maybe even into the range up here. So we'll monitor that throughout the week. Let's go ahead and take a look at ETH and Sol real quick here, and then we'll wrap this up. So Ethereum, still in the big weekly zone that we've talked about quite a bit here. Again, now to set the low, doesn't do much, but to set the low, we need to see closes above 1688, so basically 1700, to come up and test around 1789, 1800. But this is still a move in progress with full-on expansion, so don't be surprised even if it does set a low that it finds some, even if it gets above 1800, that it finds significant resistance around this 19.5 to 2100 area, because we need to see 2300. As I've said many, many times, I'm bearish below 2300, and in fact, even 2550. Which is the same twin tower candles we see at 95 on Bitcoin. I'm bearish below 2550. But even if it can crawl its way out and start, on the daily, maybe making some uptrending structure, that would look really good. And then if it can work its way back up to the red zone here, because this was a common support that it was holding, much like what Solana was holding and then lost. Ethereum lost at first. Solana followed shortly thereafter when Bitcoin started to leg down. Well, 2320 on the daily, but 2300 on the weekly is what we need to see closed above. Let's go ahead and just check the longer term time frames for Ethereum. So closes above 1474 would look really good. Would look really good to actually confirm this as a cross back to the upside if we do see that by Sunday this week. So something to watch for throughout the week. Let's go ahead and check on Solana. And we can see that Solana has worked its way back above and recovered this common area of support, and dip down into the inner supports here from the weeklies between that essentially 118 to 98. You can call it 100 to 120 if you'd like. We had that swing down to 95. Obviously it needs to hold that. It can break the swing downtrend structure on close above 147. That would look really good, but you see it's rejecting the lower first, at least initially. If it can hold on any kind of retrace to this 118 to 125, almost 126 right here, that would look really good. At worst, you just need to see it hold the close open at 105. Starts to drop that, it's going to be testing that 98 to 95, possibly lower. We can just watch Bitcoin for that. That will be our leading indicator. Any 106 is going to be the pivot. This is already getting a nice cross up, or projecting a cross up to be complete, trading here or higher by Sunday. So yeah, there's encouraging things in the weekly. I will tell you that no matter what, we need to see healthy structure built. This is a big old downtrend, big old trend break. Could it break the swing downtrend? Sure. Start building higher low structure, higher high structure from there. Same for Ethereum. I think it's going to take a little while to dig out. If it's a very quick move, likely very bearish and would be looking for rejections. So that's kind of my take on price action right now. I will, of course, update you on the Wednesday check-in. You'll probably see me around on various shows throughout the week, both on live streams and Spaces events. So go ahead and turn on notifications for the X account. Keep an eye on the YouTube if you like to watch this on TV. Otherwise, I always post and pin this video to the most recent video to my X account. It will always be the pinned. So you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, and evening, no matter where you are in the world. Please trade safe. And of course, as always, stay safe. With all that being said, Landy out. Take care.